Hi everybody, welcome back on this beautiful day. Well, we've got one, to Anna Reads. We are going to jump right back into Unmentionable, the Victorian Lady's Guide to Sex, Marriage, and Manners by Teresa O'Neill. And as I recall, yesterday we were on chapter 9 when we left off, and look at that, I managed to open right straight to it. That's new. Page 163, chapter 9. Oh, by the way, this chapter contains sensitive content. Birth control and other affronts to God. You're probably already pregnant. There isn't a whole lot else to do for entertainment in the evenings. In no time at all, you can expect to be expecting. You're going to get knapped, to use a term of the day. The infantry is coming. You'll be set to launch, plead the belly, lay a chit. You've been playing tricks and gone lumpy. So that's what all those Irish songs mean. 164, heading. Sometimes natural isn't best. If the prospect vexes you, good, you've been paying attention. Giving birth in a time when the greatest and only obstetrical innovation available is the newly fashioned baby yanking forceps is not going to meet your 21st century standards for a satisfactory birth plan. Although, for the record, you should be very grateful for these forceps. They really were better than nothing. In fact, not using them changed the course of British history. At the beginning of the 19th century, they were not popular. They existed, but it was the fashion among doctors to take a conservative management approach to childbirth, what the 21st century would proudly refer to as natural childbirth. So forceps were not used when King George IV's only legitimate daughter and heir, Princess Charlotte, went into 50-hour labor in 1817. The baby was sideways, and the doctors made no attempt to turn him. The child was stillborn, Charlotte died of internal hemorrhaging, and the overseeing physician soon committed suicide. In the wake of this tragedy, non-interference lost its popularity, and subsequently, with no heir, King George's crown passed through a younger brother down to the only remaining royal descendant, a young woman named Victoria. It could very well be that the whole reason there is a Victorian era is that those forceps weren't used. Victoria herself had no problem engaging whatever interventions were available, including being knocked out by chloroform, thereby making pain management during childbirth socially acceptable, and delivered 9 babies with no fatalities. Most women weren't so lucky, especially in a culture that did not encourage robustness in fine ladies, and I swear if it starts raining while I'm reading... Keep it to yourself, Thor. 165, heading. Why bother with babies? Now, if you'd ended up farther west, you might not mind being afflicted with numerous pregnancies so much. You might even be fine with birthing yourself a whole plague of babies. If you were a 19th century farmer's wife, yanking your existence from the stubborn mud of a Nebraskan winter with chapped and bleeding hands, you'd probably barely notice if someone tossed another baby atop the mess. Having many children was an investment for the rural and moderately poor. You were financing your own retirement with every ounce of mother's milk your toothless little millstone sucked down. By the time your oldest daughter was 7, she'd be doing a quarter of your housework. By the time all the children were out of diapers, your main job would be cooking and barking orders, ideally. I grew up as an only child, but as I understand it, eldest daughters remain secondary caregivers, while eldest sons remain princes. But that's just the understanding of an only child who happens to be quite observant on Facebook. And when you were too old to work, it would be their turn to shove milk into your toothless mouth. But that is not where you landed. In the Victorian life you've been given, your retirement was settled generations ago, with annuities rolling into your husband's bank account in perpetuity. Your survival is not so dependent on physical labor that you must breed your own workforce. So, what need have you for children? Well, because you want them, of course. They're life's greatest joy. They're your legacy. Women who complain about the trials of motherhood simply do not have the fortitude you have. Fortitude is your collective name for the nurse, nannies, and governess in your employ. If you wish, you need view your children spit-shined and polished only 1 hour a day, after which nurse will thrash them soundly if they are not on their finest behavior. Children are treasures. But for heaven's sake, you only need 2 or 3. It's indecent to have many more. No offense to Her Majesty's brood. She averaged about 1 birth for every 2 years her husband lived. But she was providing English heads to fit under the many crowns of Europe. Granted, her grandchildren would end up raining death from above on each other's countries shortly after her passing in World War I. Family reunions must have been terribly awkward, but Her Majesty had to do it for the sake of the Empire. It didn't work, but we love her for her sacrifice, especially since Queen Victoria detested pregnancy and thought babies were gross. To her grown daughter, she wrote, "I like them better than I did, if they are nice and pretty. ... Abstractedly, I have no tender for them till they have become a little human. An ugly baby is a very nasty object, and the prettiest is frightful when undressed, until about 4 months, in short as long as they have their big body and little limbs and that terrible frog-like action." I can't disagree with her all that much. Sorry, not sorry. But for you, since you have no empire to populate or farm to run, having gobs of babies is just declaring your poor self-control to the neighborhood. It's like putting out your booze bottles for recycling so everyone can see how much you drink, except it's sex. The best thing that can be said for childbirth in the 1800s was that it wasn't as deadly as it used to be. There was practically, say a 70% chance that you and the child would live. 19th century childbirth is a game of Russian roulette, where even if you win, your perineum will be badly torn with no antibiotic ointment to heal it, and where for the rest of your life you'll tinkle when you sneeze. Little note. Postnatal fistula is still a big deal in periphery countries. After women have babies, there is often little surgical intervention in these peripheral countries to sort of put them back together, and often they become social pariahs. So please look up obstetric fistula in periphery countries, and I lost my train of thought completely because there's an actual squirrel over there. Moving on. So I certainly can't argue if you've decided you want no more children. Medical science, however, is amused at your decision and wishes you the best of luck with that. It is still a very long time before Gregory Pincus and John Rock will completely change the world by inventing a dependable birth control pill, which becomes available in 1960. So your options are less scientific and more ... creative. As for me, myself, personally, I love my Depo-Provera birth control shot. I can wear white denim anytime I want to. Just saying. They are also considered by some Victorians, at least the loudest Victorians, to be unethical, unchristian, and sometimes fatally unhealthy. 169, heading Sterility, Colicky Uteri, and Weasand Monsters. The most obvious way to avoid producing an embarrassing amount of sexual byproducts was to avoid overindulgence in sex. After all, having intercourse for carnal reasons alone is like allowing your husband to use you as a prostitute. This line of thinking has not gone away in the 21st century. And abstinence only doesn't work. It doesn't. Look, John Oliver did something similar, and he's a lot funnier than I am, so just go look up John Oliver on sex ed. Which is pretty much the only way to keep him away from real prostitutes. Thus, most people who opposed birth control attempted to inspire medical fears instead of ethical ones. This also still goes on today. Especially hated was the common method withdrawal. Men of science claimed this abomination was no different than practicing one of the most deadly habits known to mankind. No, not smoking, don't be ridiculous. Smoking improves asthma and makes you look distinguished. You know, I've got my glasses for that. No, the other most deadly habit, Jeffers and Nichols, speaking again from Searchlights on Health, explain, block quote, probably no one means is more serious in its results than the practice of withdrawal or the discharge of the semen externally to the vagina. The act is incomplete and unnatural and is followed by results similar to and as disastrous as those consequent upon masturbation. In the male, it may result in impotence. In the female, in sterility. In both sexes, many nervous symptoms are produced, such as headache, defective vision, dyspepsia, insomnia, loss of memory, etc. Very many cases of uterine diseases can be attributed solely to this practice. We are grateful to Jeffers and Nichols for recognizing that our ignorance of medical matters, and apparently the female body, would make it impossible for us to understand how withdrawal produces such a rainbow of ailments, and therefore burdening us with no further details about the connection. However, other doctors point to the fact that a woman cannot orgasm if withdrawal is practiced, and it is this lack of orgasm that causes nearly all female maladies. If it seems to you at first blush that these men don't know how female orgasms work, I would beg you to hold your tongue. These men, unlike you, are secure in the knowledge that the clitoris, far from being the seat of true womanly pleasure, isn't much more than a puny vestigial penis that probably shouldn't even be there. Have you ever considered that you're the one orgasming incorrectly? This line of thinking also still continues. Orson Squire Fowler, whom we are most privileged to consult, for he is a fount of candidness in a cagey world, can illuminate this in even more detail. Block quote, woman suffers most from this vice, withdrawal, because her organs are adapted to act for a longer period. It provokes in her all diseases of her genital organs, from simple inflammation to the most serious derangements. Metritis, I don't even know what that is. Tumors, polypi, uterine colics, neurosis, cancers, mammal and ovarian diseases, sterility, leukorrhea, whatever the hell that is, etc. When I review all the diseases of the women I have attended, I believe 3/4 of them were caused by the practice of frauds in sexual intercourse, and that in most cases they can with certainty be attributed to it. A full 3/4 of the diseases in the women he has attended are the result of engaging in non-reproductive sex. That's an that is an impressive number of gynecological exams and diagnoses for a phrenologist. Remember head bump guy? Almost a disturbing number. I had assumed he concentrated his attention on head lumps, not lady bumps. It appears there was some crossover. Please, allow it to terrify you immensely that this is straight up quack medicine. Nothing about this is scientific. This man was literally a serial molester if he had in fact performed gynecological exams as a phrenologist. And not only women suffered, explains John Kellogg. He believes withdrawal is where monsters, once the actual clinical term for children with birth defects, come from. Note, Dr. Kellogg quotes many other authors in his work, but he is a bit lackadaisical about keeping them cited. According to Kellogg, the following quote comes from a man identified as Distinguished Mayor. Block quote. So who knows if the infants, too often what? Feeble and weazen, W-E-A-Z-E-N, weazen, are not the fruit of these in themselves incomplete procreations and disturbed by preoccupations foreign to the generic act. Bug. It is not reasonable to suppose that the creative power, not meeting in its disturbed functions the conditions necessary for the elaboration of a normal product, the conception might be from its origin imperfect, and the being which proceeded therefrom one of those monsters which are described in treatises on teratology. There was an enormous number of commas in there too. I am not a doctor, and I will admit I struggle to follow the wording of this excerpt, but I believe the theory runs something like this. Should a lady accidentally be splashed with the sullen, sickly sperm that slops forth from the male body during the practice of withdrawal, that sperm, being sourced from a place of most bitter melancholy, will half-heartedly lug itself toward the female egg, stumble into a peevish germination, and produce an unhealthy zygote. Well, I certainly can't prove that's not the case. Kellogg also quotes a Dr. Francis DeVay to better describe the pitiful state of the female apparatus if it is not granted an ejaculation. Block quote. A profound stimulation is felt through the entire apparatus. The uterus, fallopian tubes, and ovaries enter into a state of orgasm, a storm which is not appeased by the natural crisis. A nervous superexcitation persists. There occurs then what would take place if, presenting food to a famished man, one should snatch it from his mouth after having thus violently excited his appetite. The sensibilities of the womb and the entire reproductive system are teased for no purpose. It is to this case, too often repeated, that we should attribute the multiple neuroses, those strange affections which originate in the genital system of woman. Snatching food from a starving man's mouth, fallopian tubes in an orgasmic storm? And shouldn't the clitoris be at least a token piece of this famished apparatus? These questions you may be asking yourself, I know. You might even be thinking that the men of this era are greatly overestimating the power of their semen by believing its mere presence will bring you to a state of coital nirvana. But shush, dear. Without possessing the potent life nectar yourself, you really are in no position to judge its qualities. 174 heading. Prepare to meet your God. Onanism and property extant. As I said before, It was difficult to convince people that preventing conception was unethical. But that didn't stop a determined ragtag group of righteous men from trying to show that there was inherent sin in contraception. Kellogg takes us through the earliest known record of this evil practice. Conjugal onanism, block quote. The soiling of the conjugal bed by the shameful maneuvers to which we have made allusion is mentioned for the first time in Genesis 38, verse 6, and the following verses. And it came to pass, when he, Onan, went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him. I actually do have recollection of hearing this in the 6th grade. I went to a Catholic school 1st through 8th, and then 11th and 12th grade. I heard about onanism in the 6th grade. I was terrified by it then. I'm still terrified by it now. In the Bible story Kellogg refers to, a man named Er was killed by God for his wickedness, details not disclosed. Onan was his brother, and it was his duty to take his brother's place and impregnate his sister-in-law Tamar. Biblical scholars say that if Tamar had conceived, her child would be considered heirs and would inherit handsomely. If she did not, Onan, the next in line, would inherit instead. Onan purposefully withheld his fecundity, spilling it on the ground instead. So God killed him too. Incidentally, you should purchase yourself a little pet bird, as was popular practice at this time. Onan would be a cracking name for the little beggar, as caged birds are constantly spilling their seeds on the ground. Ew. The interference being, God prefers that you not practice withdrawal. Inference, not interference. Orson Squire Fowler would prefer this also. I leave it to you to decide whose wrath is more frightful. Oh goodness, this block quote starts in all caps. Preventing conception outrages every sexual law. Think you, after God has created you men and women and ordained all this creative machinery solely to secure reproduction, you can thwart and cheat him without incurring his retribution commensurate with his highest law you break? Prepare to meet your God, ye who persist. Every argument for it is futile. ... Right bearing never exhausts, but always improves mothers, and large families are the best pieces of property extant. Isn't that still the logic of the quiverful movement? Besides, everyone knows that it is the childless women who live lives of pointlessness, riddled with disease and brain fever. Having many children is the healthiest thing a woman can do. According to Jeffers and Nichols, block quote, having children under proper circumstances never ruins the health and happiness of any woman. In fact, womanhood is incomplete without them. What is that? She may have a dozen or more and still have better health than before marriage. Well, sometimes there is a general wearing down of the reproductive organs if a woman produces a dozen or more children. Incidentally, I've come to understand that the World Health Organization now describes excessive pregnancy as violence against women, but I don't remember the exact citation, and in the interest of full disclosure, I encourage you to look that up. But I think it was pregnancy in excess of 4 is described as violence against women, especially if the woman cannot plan her family. Among other maladies, the prolapsed uterus was very common in this era. The best way I can describe it to you is to have you imagine your reproductive tract as a tube sock. Now turn it out and let it dangle there. Prolapse. Excuse me. 176. Heading. Thwarting sperm. That almost sounds like a band. Of course, these men were not fools. They understood there were cases where it was not advisable to have more children. There was one method that even the most stalwart internal ejaculation supporter could endorse, and that was temperance. If you want no more children, have no more sexual intercourse. We are, after all, men, not animals. Well, technically, humans, are animals. Actually, more than technically. As I mentioned, the abstinence option was not popular or successful. It doesn't work. Even when paired with the healthful suggestion that couples sleep in separate beds to avoid temptation, a very expensive option beyond most families' financial means. Medical men like Jeffers and Nichols, who did not want to anger God or the United States government, publishing information about birth control was illegal for most of the 19th century, as we shall see. Often offered timetables when a woman was most fertile, least fertile, and even temporarily sterile. Oh, this is going to be good. Another provision of nature, block quote, for a certain period between her monthly illness, every woman is sterile. My eyebrow is starting to twitch from this. Conception may be avoided by refraining from coition except for this particular number of days, and there will be no evasion of normal intercourse, no resorting to disgusting practices, and nothing degrading. This generous provision of nature often proved not generous enough, which is why even today, reference to the rhythm method, which is, at least when I was born, the Catholic Church was still recommending the rhythm method as its only option of birth control, and yeah, that doesn't work. Rhythm method is usually followed with a baby-laden punchline. Women have been trying to block sperm from egg from the moment they suspected what the meeting of the two resulted in. The methods and ingredients have varied over the centuries and around the globe, but the basics have been the same. Sperm, put up a barrier, wash it out, or try to kill it before it reaches its prize. Dr. James Ashton, in his remarkably informative and detailed The Book of Nature, found no sin nor ethical dilemma in a married couple trying to limit family size. Here are a few methods he recommends, along with one suggestion from fellow Dr. H.P. Monroe. We have sponge and spermicide. Procure a fine sponge at a drugstore and cut off a piece of it about the size of a walnut, and then make a fine silk string by twisting together some threads of sewing silk. Tie one end of the string to the piece of sponge. Wet the sponge in a weak solution of sulfate of iron or of any of the solutions before mentioned as fatal to the animalculae of the semen. Before connection, insert the piece of sponge far up into your person. You can place it entirely out of the way by use of a smooth stick of the proper size and shape. The string will hang out but will be no obstacle. After the act is over, you withdraw the sponge. Now, this Sears Roebuck catalog has no idea what you're going to want to do with a cup-shaped ladies' sponge with netting and string. It simply sells them. I think it's assumed they're for use in craft projects. And enjoy the lovely shadow of my leaves here because that really is kind of pretty. Let's see, douching. The judicious use of an ordinary female syringe with cold water alone or a weak solution of white vitriol or other stringent in cold water immediately after coition will in most cases prevent conception. By the use of this article, a female may inject as much fluid as she pleases through an elastic tube, quite as far up into her person as is necessary. The mixture should be prepared beforehand and with the syringe kept by her bedside, as success often depends upon promptness in using it. One of many syringes, douchebags with nozzles, available for general health purposes. Nothing else. Sears Roebuck supports clean, healthy rectums and vaginal canals. Nothing else. And you'll notice this design really kind of hasn't changed very much. As a matter of fact, you can probably still get these at CVS. Homemade spermicide recipes, oh dear Lord. The recipes in Ashton's book contain fairly innocuous ingredients: alum, zinc, iron, rainwater. They also probably didn't work great, especially in the case of douching. Besides the greased lightning movement of sperm, the aroused tissue of the vaginal walls stretches out, then wrinkles and folds back up when arousal has passed, leaving infinite crannies for sperm to sequester itself in, where even a very thorough flushing cannot reach. This is probably one of the reasons quickness is advised. Sometimes, as in the recipe below, medical men suggest putting the sperm killer in place before it is needed. These here are Ladyline antiseptic suppositories. And they are just for cleanliness. They kill germs and possibly things that rhyme with germ. Those you really don't see often these days unless it's monostat, and those are for yeast infections. Dr. H.P. Monroe shares his remedy in an 1897 volume of the periodical The Medical World. I make a vaginal suppository of cocoa butter, into which I incorporate from 6 to 10% of boracic acid and the same amount of tannic acid. These suppositories should weigh from, looks like half a dram to 1 dram each. From 3 to 5 minutes before Congress, one of these suppositories is introduced into the vagina and pushed well up against the cervix. The cocoa butter having melted and set the boracic and tannic acids free, they act as an effectual germicide, thus destroying the spermatozoa. Oh my. Scrotum bondage. Don't do this one. By don't do this one, I mean if you're gonna do this, do your research, do it safely, consult a professional, have a safe word. Yes means yes, anything but yes means no. I'm not here to judge, but probably don't do it this way. Some men tie up the scrotum to prevent a discharge of semen, and thus hope to avoid impregnating the female, but this method is excessively hurtful, as it forces the discharge into the bladder, from whence it passes off with the urine. Such a practice will in a short time so derange the procreative organs as to send all the semen into the bladder as fast as it generates, and the effect on health will be a wasting away of vitality, in the same manner as if the patient constantly practiced self-pollution. Moving right along, I don't know how much of this information from Ashton, beyond the words exceedingly hurtful, is accurate, but really that first part is probably all that need be said. And seriously, don't get your sexual advice from Deadpool. And if you do your research, consult a professional. Be safe, okay? Be risk aware. Just please don't be excessively stupid, all right? I'm not here to judge, but don't be excessively stupid. Withdrawal. But the most effective prevention the Book of Nature recommends is, of course, the one with the greatest history of causing God to slay its practitioners. Ashton does not believe withdrawal should be equated with onanism. This plan injures neither party, he writes, nor does it really diminish the pleasurable sensations of connection. and, if properly performed, the act of coition is as pleasurable, as healthy, and as complete as it can be when the semen is fully injected. He is even prepared to address questions of cleanliness so as not to disgust ladies of refinement. Again, there seems to be some misunderstanding that once a woman is given the gift of semen, even internally, it vaporizes into pure light and she does not need to deal with it again. We know this not to be the case, darling, but let us not disabuse these gentlemen of their pleasant illusion. Block quote. The cleanliness of this practice is also a great desideratum. I have no idea how to actually pronounce that, but I learned it from reading, so give me a break. As females of any degree of refinement can understand, I would then suggest to married people the following rule. Always carry to bed a clean napkin, which is to be kept in the hand of the male during the nuptial act. It will then be a very easy matter to place this napkin in a proper position to receive the semen on withdrawal at the instant it would otherwise be injected into the body of the female. If you do it at the proper moment, no pleasure is lost to either party, and habit will soon make you expert in that respect. While he's not entirely incorrect on, yes, you contain the mess that way, I must give to you the advice given to me by my gynecologist. 2 forms of birth control every time. One must be a barrier. No exceptions. That just sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? If only it were as easy as that, good sir. But you have neglected to satisfactorily account for the presence of monster sperm and spasmodic vagina disease caused by lack of semen supplements, or to give us the confidence that we will not be slain, as precedent suggests we might. 181, heading, Objects of No Sire. Her puns are wonderful. They really are. They're growing on me, what can I say? Other medical texts list devices to use against pregnancy. The condom, of course, which was just making its transformation from animal skin sheath to horrid, thick, rubber male member Mackinaw. That's a mental image for you. It was unpopular, for it slipped, broke, diminished sensation, and gave the female no control over the situation. One doctor, F. Jackson, writing to The Medical World, Volume 15, 1897, lists other devices he has encountered in his practice and his reasons for dismissing them. The use of the hood, or French passer, cervical cap, for the female requires too much skill in its adjustment, so that many times it fails to accomplish its purpose. The aluminum button to be placed in the uterus is of more recent origin. The objection to this is it can only be used when the uterus is perfectly free from all discharge. This likely refers to an early form of the IUD. This here is a wishbone-style pessary, used for both thumbtacking prolapses back into place and potentially birth control. Yeah, that looks a little bit like a modern IUD, but honestly, both of those things terrify me, I'm not gonna lie. There was another reason for not using these objects in attempts to thwart conception. Simply put, because they were, in fact, objects. Ones that needed to be procured, sent for, mailed. Clear into the 20th century, it was illegal to mail contraceptives or information about contraceptives in America. How the medical world, though not intended for the public, even managed its distribution is a mystery to me. This information wasn't always illegal. The Book of Nature, which has given us such detailed information, was published and distributed legally in 1861. 12 years later, that would have been impossible. Why? Because of one man. hailed by some as the last great Puritan Christian of America, considered by most an arrogant, draconian, pharisaical busybody who believed he had a right to nestle himself between the bedsheets of every couple in the country, Anthony Comstock. And he looks it too. I'm sorry, book cover agreement. 183 heading. What Comstockery is this? Comstockery is defined as excessive opposition to supposed immorality in the arts or prudery. It's something a gruff old English teacher might bark out at a school board meeting where it is decided to ban all books that contain the word climax, including Dumbo. Utter Comstockery. Now, I am an avowed Disney hobbyist historian, but I've never read the book for Dumbo, don't want to, and don't want to know where that there might have been the word climax in it. Just, Dumbo makes me cry, moving on. Anthony Comstock's mother died when he was only 10 years old. She had been a fiercely religious woman, and after her death, her son vowed to make her spirit proud. Comstock prayed for guidance, God's love, and above all, purity. Luther, is that you? Are you making an appearance today? He waited long enough. Luther, come on, buddy. That little buddy, that's a skink. Leave it alone. That's a skink. You don't need to bother the skink. When Comstock's brother was... Oh, that's not even Luther. That's Onyx. Sweet cheese, you're large. When Comstock's brother was killed at Gettysburg, Comstock enlisted in his place. He was nowhere near the front line, but rather in Florida, living in barracks with other young soldiers. Comstock discovered this environment to be much more sweaty and sweary than the one he'd been reared in. Imagine that. The men had very little interest in purity, though Comstock and the Young Men's Christian Association, yes, the YMCA, tried to urge it upon them. After the war, he went to New York City as a clerk. There he found a city absolutely writhing in sin. I've only been to New York City once, and that hasn't stopped. There, Comstock, it should be noted, was not just against birth control and sexual sins. In his published work, he warned against the inherent sin found in novels, patent medicine, state lotteries, poker, pool, children's storybooks, newspapers that reported crime too engagingly, the theater, flashy advertisements, candy stores, and liberals. If you're happy and you know it, it's a sin. That one hasn't stopped either. The story goes that a good friend of his bought a dirty book which inflamed his lust, which took him to a brothel, which gave him syphilis, which killed him in a most humiliating, flesh-rotting manner. Apparently, one of Comstock's first takedowns was to find the bookseller who sold his friend the book and have him arrested. Comstock began seeking out vice in all its forms, sniffing out brothels and gambling halls and purveyors of contraception, and calling the police on every squalid hole of moral turpitude he found. So this guy was just Barbecue Betty before Barbecue Betty was a thing. And when that wasn't enough, he headed off to Washington, D.C. with intentions to amend an existing bill that made it illegal to send obscene material through the mail. He believed the existing definition of obscene was not nearly inclusive enough. Was Anthony Comstock a policeman? A lawyer? A preacher even? No. Just a man who believed that lust was the root of all sins and that people would not sin if there were no opportunities to do so. My 6th grade teacher had a similar personality. It turned out that's all it took to change the law of our country. When all was said and done, the new act, passed in 1873 and popularly known as the Comstock Law, read thusly, and this is one heck of a block quote: "Every obscene, lewd, or lascivious book, pamphlet, picture, paper, writing, print, or other publication of an indecent character, and every article or thing designed or intended for the prevention of conception or procuring of abortion, and every article or thing intended or adapted for any indecent or immoral use, and every written or printed card, circular, book, pamphlet, advertisement, or notice of any kind, giving information, directly or indirectly, where, or how, or of whom, or by what means, any of the hereinbefore mentioned matters, articles, or things may be obtained or made, ... are hereby declared to be non-mailable matter, and shall not be conveyed in the mails, nor delivered from any post office, nor by any letter carrier." I am tempted to count the commas in that, but I just got these glasses, everything's a bit jumpy, and we're running out of time here. Really, this has gone on for 46 minutes. He was not able to ban candy stores. However, now you couldn't advertise products or services related to human sexuality or contraception, and you certainly couldn't send condoms, pessaries, except possibly to doctors who could prove they were giving them to patients to help them pin their prolapsed organs back into place, or spermicides through the mail. Technically, the new law didn't make the practice of contraception illegal, just as technically as prohibition didn't make it illegal to drink booze, only to make, sell, or transport it. If you could still somehow get your hands on it, enjoy. On that note, I promise you this is just coffee. The overall effect of this law was to put contraception in the same psychological category as the psychological category as the most wretched filth, printable, and deadly illegal abortions. And no, Comstock did not consider birth control an alternative to abortions. To many Christians of the time, preventing a life was the same as murdering one, and that line of thought still goes on today. He did not associate birth control with half-dead mothers of 12 hungry babes whose drunk husbands kept impregnating them with yet another feeble life that would starve and wither. Excessive pregnancy is violence against people with uteruses. The World Health Organization said it. I'm agreeing with it. If you want to hop off my channel because you disagree with it, hop. To him, contraception made it possible for people to have sex without consequence. And by people, he mostly meant whores and the once innocent young men they defiled, who in turn went out and defiled the whole world. I'm scratching the book. Much of Comstock's writings defending his crusade are devoted to listing the crimes and vices committed by youth whom he believed were inflamed to sin by obscene literature and dens of iniquity. This is the only reason he can think of for why young people turn to crime. You, with 150 years of social scientific knowledge that Comstock did not have, may think to ask a question he did not. What sort of homes did these youths come from? In the early 20th century, Margaret Sanger asked and answered that question. Her answer came from years spent helping the poorest of the poor. The young offenders Comstock pointed to as victims of unmonitored lust most often came from crushing poverty, from homes where there were too many mouths to feed and parents too exhausted to care for the children they could not prevent themselves from having. Still, goes on, still goes on. Sanger was indicted in 1914 for publishing birth control pamphlets. Comstock died in 1915 with his law still on the books and Sanger defeated in court. That balance did not hold long. A year after Comstock's death, Sanger opened a clinic, part of a greater association she founded that became Planned Parenthood. Comstock might have won the birth control battle, but he did not win the war. 188, heading. When women make decisions, humanity's greatest threat. Comstock and his supporters aside, Victorian people were not all that opposed to birth control. In fact, by the standards of some, Mr. Fowler, who had 3 children by 3 wives, wonderful how that always goes, isn't it? They were entirely, what is falling out of this tree? They were entirely too much in favor of it, especially the women. Fowler laments the folly of those who desire small families. Block quote, most married pairs are stark mad against issue. Whoever can patent a means of enjoying fully without conceiving or injuring could soon become the richest man in Christendom, so highly would men prize and pay for it, and women the most, purity and conscience to the contrary, and most married are insanely bent on small families. Gee, I wonder why. It is perhaps because of this, how truly desperately people wanted to limit their families, that many learned men in the medical community claimed that even if they knew a good way to prevent conception, they ought never, ever tell anyone seeking it, especially women. After one doctor writes the medical world with his proprietary spermicide recipe, he ends his letter with this warning, block quote, but let me caution you never to write a prescription for this remedy. The knowledge of these remedies should not become public property, for few women would ever consent to endure the pains of childbirth if they were in possession of the knowledge so simple and yet so effective a remedy. The editors insert a note below his contributions. Block quote, we wish to emphasize the last paragraph of the above. The physician should not only be thoroughly convinced that it is extremely important from a medical point of view that his patient should not become pregnant, but he should consult his conscience long and seriously before allowing himself to take a hand in this kind of business, and when he does so, the patient should not know how or where to get the preparation except through him. Another doctor contributes to the same feature but declares his knowledge should be given freely to all who wish it. The medical world responds thusly, block quote, to give out general information upon this subject is not to be thought of. How many women and men in your practice would shirk the duties of parenthood if they knew how, and thus miss the greatest joys of life? How many children would there be in your community if only those that are wanted would come? Far too many married people would procrastinate, saying no, not yet, until the best time to procreate, or the ability to procreate had gone. Then would come a lonely old age after a desolate life. No, doctors don't have any hand in this business. They just admitted they would rather have children be unwanted than not be. What woman would choose motherhood if she could avoid it? I mean, women are certainly pleasant enough creatures when not under duress of any sort, but mentally, we can agree they're nearly indistinguishable from large, sexy children who can cook. Thus, women have a childlike selfishness in their capricious natures. If the cost of not having to endure bloating or back labor meant ending the human race, the average woman wouldn't think twice. Goodbye, propagation of the species. I'm keeping my 28-inch waist. It is also possible that this publication made a point of condemning public access to birth control for the sake of legality. The Comstock law was still in effect when this magazine was printed, though apparently with waning strictness. insinuating that women would not be satisfied until they'd finished the destruction begun by Eve in the Garden of Eden, might, I hope, have been mostly for show. Well, considering that still goes on today, why would women become pregnant if they could avoid it? On and on and on. 191. Cursing and swearing is too tame for you drones. Of course, some people did believe birth control was to be one of the highest forms of selfishness and evil. Some people were authentic in their desires to populate. Some people had even done the math. Well, one person and some math. That person, of course, is Mr. Fowler in one of his finest rants. Block quote. God bless, that's a block quote. Till our world is full, all should help fill it with the best they can, nor any refuse because they cannot have the very best. For poor life is as much better than none at all as the happiness it can experience and impart through time and eternity. Our earth contains over 30 million square miles of good arable land, with 640 acres each. About 20 and then 9 zeros after it. Each acre capable of clothing, housing, and feeding 5 persons, aided by the oceans. Figure up that long string of mortals, each enjoying more than tongue can tell, and all forever marching into infinitely ecstatic and everlasting bliss. What a burning shame that God's sun, air, earth, fruits, grains, and all other provisions for human enjoyments should go to waste solely because you drones are too lazy to marry or stingy to reproduce, though charring with lust. Cursing and swearing at you seems too tame. How far wrong is it to say that not producing is as bad as murdering that number? For who but rather exist forever, yet be murdered here than not to be? I have no answer for his question, partially because I don't understand the question. One of many reasons, no doubt, the decision to reproduce should not be laid in my fumbling feminine hands. All right, we end on page 92. This has been Anna Reads. This has been Chapter 9 of Unmentionable, the Victorian Lady's Guide to Sex, Marriage, and Manners by Therese O'Neill. I have no idea where Luther is, but Onyx decided to stroll over that away. If you have something that you're interested in hearing me read, I would be glad to hear your suggestion. So you can contact me on Instagram at serenity_sweet13, on Twitter at serenitysweet13, no underscore. If you came to my YouTube channel via Facebook, you're welcome to contact me on Facebook, or you can just direct message or comment here on YouTube. Everything that's going on is still pretty heavy. Right now it's March 24th. Emory University has encouraged everyone, at least in Georgia, to shelter in place until March 29th. Those 4 days could be crucial, so do what they say, guys. Please, everybody, we're here to take care of each other. This kind of quackery should have died 150 years ago, and it hasn't, so it's up to us. Please, have courage and be kind.